The following message is transmitted at the request of the County Sheriff's Department. This is not a test. A localized atmospheric anomaly has been reported within the Blackwood Valley state forestry lines. Residents living within a 3-mile radius of the tree line are ordered to lock all exterior doors, extinguish all indoor lights, and retreat to interior rooms without windows. Do not attempt to evacuate by vehicle. Roads leading out of the valley are currently blocked by unidentifiable gridlock. If you look out your window, you may notice changes in the topography of your backyard. The State Forestry Department strictly advises, do not count the trees. If the number of trunks visible on your lawn is higher than it was at sunset, do not attempt to correct the count. Do not look at the canopy. If you hear your name being called from the treeline in the voice of a missing family member, ignore the transmission. They are no longer in the woods. My name is Thomas Vane. I've worked as a clearing contractor for the Blackwood Timber Corporation for 11 years. I know these woods. I know the way pine smells before a storm, and I know how the ground feels when the autumn frost hits the soil. But 3 days ago, the woods changed their layout. We were clearing a dead growth zone in Sector 7. By 4 in the afternoon, the sun should have been hitting the clearing at a sharp angle. Instead, the sky turned a greasy, bruised shade of purple. The shadows didn't stretch away from the sun. They stretched toward us. Then, the machinery died. 2 heavy diesel excavators turned off at the exact same second. My junior cutter, a 19-year-old kid named Marcus, walked over to the edge of the clearing to check the fuel lines. He stopped right at the perimeter where the old-growth oaks begin. I called out to him. He didn't answer. He was just staring up into the branches. When I walked up behind him, I noticed he wasn't breathing. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely fixed on a specific oak tree about 30 feet into the thicket. I looked up to see what he was tracking. The tree didn't have bark. The trunk was covered in deep, parallel ridges that looked exactly like human ribs wrapped in gray leather. And the branches, they weren't growing upward toward the sky. They were bending downward, reaching toward Marcus like fingers. I grabbed Marcus by the jacket and pulled him backward. The moment his feet left the clearing, his nose started bleeding. A thick, dark stream of blood that ran down his chin. He didn't blink. He just whispered 4 words over and over again, "The bark has eyes." We left the equipment and ran back to the supervisor's cabin. By the time we locked the door, the sun had fully set. That was 2 days ago. No one has come to help us. The radio gives us nothing but white noise and a rhythmic clicking sound that repeats every 4 seconds. Last night, Marcus went to the window. I told him to stay away from the glass, but the kid was like a sleepwalker. He pressed his forehead against the pane. I watched from the kitchen corner as the silhouette of his head suddenly jerked backward. Outside, in the dark, the treeline had moved. The oak trees we had been cutting down that afternoon were standing less than 10 feet from the cabin porch. They hadn't fallen. They had walked. And they weren't empty. Hanging from the lowest branches of the lead oak were 3 shapes. They looked like large, heavy cocoons woven out of gray pine needles and dead leaves. But as the wind blew, the cocoons spun around. Through the mesh of dead leaves, I saw a face. It was the face of Arthur Miller, the man who went missing from the valley in 1974. His skin was the color of ash, and his mouth was stretched open in a permanent, silent scream. His teeth had been entirely removed. Marcus didn't scream when he saw the face. He just started counting. 1, he said, pointing at the trunk closest to the porch. 2. 3. I told him to stop. I closed my eyes and covered my ears, but his voice went right through my fingers. He reached number 24 before his voice cracked. There were only 12 trees in the yard when we built this cabin. Crack! The sound came from beneath our boots. The roots of the new trees weren't staying in the forest. They were boring through the soil, ripping through the stone foundation of the cabin. I watched a thick, pale root break through the floorboards near the wood stove. It didn't look like wood. It moved like a blind, hungry worm, tasting the air before sliding toward Marcus's boots. Marcus didn't move. He was at number 31. The window pane didn't smash. The glass simply dissolved, turning into a fine, gray dust as the branches pressed against the frame. A long, gray limb, flexible like a spine, reached into the room. It wrapped around Marcus's neck. He didn't fight it. As the branch lifted his feet off the floorboards, his eyes rolled back into his head. His jaw unhinged, dropping low against his throat, and from his mouth came that exact same underwater clicking sound. He wasn't Marcus anymore. He was a branch. This tape was recovered from the Vane residential cabin on November 3, 1996, by the State Guard Recovery Unit. The cabin interior was found entirely filled with topsoil and dead oak leaves. No human remains were located on the property. The Department of Forestry has officially updated the boundaries of the Blackwood Reserve. Sector 7 is no longer recognized as state land. It has been reclassified as an unmonitored zone. If you live in the Blackwood Valley area and notice an oak tree standing on your property that was not there yesterday morning, do not approach it. Do not attempt to chop it down. Wood harvested from these anomalies carries a heartbeat. This concludes local broadcast number 4. Please disconnect your television set from the wall outlet immediately. They are using the signal to see where you are sitting. 10 days after Thomas Vane's cabin was filled with topsoil, the State Department of Forestry officially ceased all ground operations in the Blackwood Valley region. The public was told that the area was sealed due to an underground radon gas leak. They were told the military checkpoints at the perimeter were there for public safety. They lied. The checkpoints weren't built to keep civilians out. They were built to monitor the expansion of Sector 7. On November 14, Ranger Captain Alan Vance broke protocol. He drove his patrol vehicle past the concrete barriers of Checkpoint 3, heading directly into the unmonitored zone. He was looking for his brother, Thomas. He brought a portable VHS camcorder mounted to his dashboard and a secondary audio recorder pinned to his uniform. The following media represents the final 90 minutes of his transmission before his signal was permanently overwritten by a local television broadcast. This is Captain Vance. If this tape is recovered by the base camp, let it be known that the perimeter map is completely useless. I'm standing where the old fire tower used to be. The tower is gone. It didn't fall over. The steel supports were snapped cleanly at the base, and the entire cabin structure was dragged down into a sinkhole that wasn't here yesterday. The air out here doesn't taste right. It smells like copper and wet mulch. The silence is absolute. There are no crickets. No owls. No wind. But the forest isn't quiet. Every few minutes, the ground beneath my boots shifts. It feels like walking on the back of a massive, breathing animal. I've reached the perimeter of Thomas's clearing. His cabin is still standing, but it doesn't look like a building anymore. The oak trees have grown over the roof, their thick gray branches pinning the structure to the earth like giant fingers. I'm approaching the front porch. The door is wide open. But the doorway isn't empty. A thick, gray root about the width of a human torso is lying across the threshold. It's pulsing. Every 4 seconds, the bark expands and contracts. And if I get close enough, I can hear a sound coming from inside the wood. It's a heartbeat. A slow, wet, heavy thumping. I didn't go inside the cabin. I couldn't. As I stood on the porch, the pulsing root outside the door split open. It didn't break like wood, it tore open like wet skin. A thick, clear fluid leaked onto the floorboards, and inside the split bark, I saw clothing. It was a gray canvas jacket with the Blackwood Timber logo on the sleeve. It was Thomas's jacket. I backed away from the porch, and that's when the clicking started. It didn't come from one direction. It came from the entire canopy above me. Thousands of branches clicking together like teeth. I looked up. The canopy wasn't green anymore. The leaves had turned a dull, matte black, and they were shaking violently even though there was no breeze. And then, the trees began to straighten. The trunks that had been leaning over the cabin slowly pulled themselves upward, their roots tearing out of the soil with a sound like snapping bones. They didn't have legs, but they moved. They slid across the dirt, closing the gaps between them, narrowing the path back to my truck. They were herd animals. And I had walked right into the middle of the pack. I ran back toward the patrol truck. The forest was shifting its geometry while I moved. Every time I passed an oak, another one would slide into my path from the fog. I was counting them to keep my sanity. 10. 11. 12. By the time I saw the headlights of my truck through the trees, I was at number 31. But there were only 30 trees on this trail when I drove in. I stopped 10 feet from my driver's side door. Standing directly beside my truck was tree number 32. It was taller than the others. Its bark wasn't gray, it was a deep, bruised black. And hanging from its lowest branch, suspended by thick vines wrapped around his wrists, was Marcus, the junior cutter. His eyes were completely gone, replaced by smooth, pale knots of wood. His mouth was pinned open by a thin twig that had grown up from his throat. As my flashlight hit his face, his jaw twitched. He didn't speak. But his chest expanded, and from the wood inside his throat came my brother Thomas's voice. It was distorted, flat, and hollow, but it was him. It said, "Alan, don't count them. If you count them, they know you can see the shapes." The branch holding Marcus slowly lowered him to the ground. His legs didn't bend, they were rooted into the soil. He began to slide toward me, his boots dragging through the dirt like dead weight. Ranger Captain Alan Vance's patrol vehicle was located on November 16, 1996, sitting idling near the Sector 7 perimeter fence. The vehicle's fuel tank was completely empty. The driver's side window had been rolled down. Inside the cabin, the seats, dashboard, and steering wheel were found covered in a 3-inch layer of gray pine needles. The dashboard camera was still running, but the tape had been entirely erased by a localized television signal override. The Department of Forestry has officially classified Captain Vance as missing in the line of duty. This concludes Local Broadcast Number 4, Supplemental File. If you look out your window tonight and notice that the trees in your yard are leaning closer to your house than they were this afternoon, do not shine a flashlight at them. Light gives them an outline to follow.